What's shaking, gangs? Jeff Bastine here, and today we're going to go into part 2 of stuff you're going to need to build a studio. So today we're going to go over some of the more advanced stuff. Now some of the stuff you may need, some of the stuff you might not need, but we're going to go over all of it anyway. Alright, so the first bit to go over is some furniture. Well, you're going to need a desk, that's just a given. So whether you use a desk that you just happen to have lying around, you go to IKEA and pick something up, you buy yourself some big fancy studio desk, or if you're really handy, you just build yourself a nice custom one. Either way, regardless of how you do it, you're going to need a desk because, well, none of this stuff floats. Now to go along with your desk, whether it's part of the desk or a separate piece of furniture, you're probably going to need some sort of rack unit. A lot of the studio equipment you're going to buy is probably going to be rack mountable, and you're not going to want to just have that on the floor piled up. You're going to want to put it in a rack case. Now if you're going to go the route of, just purchasing a studio desk, typically they're going to have a few rack slots installed in them already. Or again, depending on how handy you are, you might just be able to build your own custom rack case. Now the last piece of furniture might not be something you need until further down the road, but some sort of storage unit, like a cabinet or a pantry or something along those lines. That way you have somewhere you can store microphones and things like that. Now if you only have one microphone, you could probably just leave it on a single mic stand and be fine. But again, as your microphone collection grows over time, you're going to want somewhere where you can store them properly. And it doesn't even necessarily need to be just for microphones. I've got a pantry cabinet over there, I've got my microphone stored in it, the cases that came with the microphones, I've got extra drums for my drum kit stored in there. So regardless of what or how you use it, some type of storage is going to be very important to keep your studio nice, clean, and organized. Now the last item you're definitely going to want, now I kind of class this under furniture because I guess you could consider it functional decor, but that would be some kind of acoustic treatment. Now without trying to pry open Pandora's box on this subject, basically acoustic treatment wise, if nothing else, you're going to want acoustic treatment at your first reflection points, if possible on the ceiling above you, and if needed, depending on the size of your room, you may want some corner traps to absorb some of the low end frequencies in the corners of your room. Now just a quick little FYI, egg cartons don't do anything. That thin foam you can buy, it's garbage. Don't waste your money. Buy or build yourself some proper panels. Now they can get a little bit expensive, but again, if you can build your own, if you're handy, you can save yourself a ton of money and just make them yourself. And I keep hinting at, building things yourself, so just as a spoiler alert, when the weather gets nicer and I can start bringing my power tools and all that back outside, we're actually going to do some videos and show you guys how to build some of this stuff. So, yeah, if you don't have any power tools, you might want to save some money and head to the local Home Depot and start spending some of it. And on that note, let's get into the next section of kit you're probably going to need. Alright, so the next item you're going to want to look into and add to your shopping list would be external hard drives. Now I've already done a video where part of it is talking about why you want to have external hard drives, so I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole on this today. But running your sessions off an external hard drive is just one of those tricks that you can use to help speed your computer up. I'll link that video down below, by the way. Now how many you're going to need would totally depend on you. For myself, I have 4 hard drives going. The one built into the iMac, a shared one that my Logic sessions and all my photography work are on, another one where all the sample libraries are stored, and then the 4th is a giant backup drive that all the other 3 hard drives back up to. But yeah, you definitely want some hard drives. Now the next 2 items kind of go hand in hand as I use both of them. And that would be rack mount power conditioners and possibly a battery backup. Now a rack mount power conditioner is essentially a rack mount power bar. And they also usually have some type of power conditioning built in. So depending on the electricity in your house, maybe you have a tube amp and when you plug it into a wall, the amp makes a lot of noise and hums. Well, if you plugged it into a power conditioner, then more than likely that noise and hum would completely go away. It just means you have dirty power in your house. It happens. Now the battery backup is the same sort of idea. You can get them rack mount, but they're like ridiculous amounts of money if you get a rack mount one. But same sort of idea, it works like a power strip, except there's a giant battery inside of it. So what this is great for is plugging your computer and things like that into, so if the power happens to go out, your computer and such is still on and powered. So if you're around and the power happens to go out, that buys you some time to at least go shut the computer down properly, instead of the power just going wham and your computer's done. So the way I like to organize these units is the computer, audio interface, backup hard drives, they plug into the battery backup, because those are things that are going to be on all the time, but then into the rack mount power conditioner, things like your studio monitors, things like that you don't need to have powered on all the time, those I plug into a power conditioner, and then when I'm not working, I can just flick one switch on the front of the panel, all that stuff is off, easy peasy. One switch as opposed to having to go and manually turn off a whole bunch of different items. No, thank you. And now it's time for my question of the week for you guys. So I mentioned earlier about having the ability to build your own acoustic panels or a rack case or a desk, things like that. So this is something I would like to do a video series on when the weather gets a little nicer. So to all you watching out there, is that something that would be of interest to you? Let me know in the comments section down below. Alright, so getting on to patch bays. Now I don't own a patch bay just because I only have a couple of pieces of outboard gear, so there's really at this point no point in me having a patch bay. But if you're going to start buying a lot of outboard gear to use in your studio, then at some point you're going to want a patch bay. So what exactly would you use a patch bay for? Well again, let's say you have a whole bunch of outboard gear. All of the ins and outs from that outboard gear, the back of it, would plug into the back of the patch bay. And then on the front panel of the patch bay, you would have a whole bunch of other connectors. So you'd use little patch cables, and then you can run different effects into different effects units without having to climb into the back of a unit with a flashlight and try to route all the stuff in the back of a rack case. It's just a simple little panel, and you can do all your routing right from the front of the patch bay. And that's pretty much a patch bay in a nutshell. Now the next item you may or may not need would be a headphone amplifier. Now any audio interface that you buy is going to have at least one headphone amp and sometimes even two, which if it's just you in your studio or you're just recording one person at a time, more than enough. But if you're trying to record bands and you're trying to record a band live all playing together, well 1 to 2 headphones aren't going to do you any good. That's when you're going to want a dedicated headphone amp. Now these can come in different configurations from an extra couple of headphone amps, to like 6 or 8 in a rack unit. And each amplifier is going to have its own little volume control. That way you can whip up some headphone mixes in your DAW and send headphone feeds to anybody you need to send a headphone feed to. Now, speaking of sending headphone feeds to musicians in your studio, that's going to lead us into snakes. No, not like the slithery danger noodles or nope ropes. A cable snake is another one of those things that can come in a bunch of different lengths and configurations, but it's basically a whole bunch of cables bundled up together, and they could have XLRs on both ends. They could have 1/4 inch and XLRs on each end. Or you can buy snakes where there's a box unit on the other end of it that'll have a whole bunch of inputs and outputs. So say you got a drum kit 20 feet away and you don't want to run all these bajillion cables back and forth from a drum kit, well you can get a snake. You would mount part of this to the wall and that would have all the feeds so that you can plug your microphones directly right behind the drum kit, and then that bundle of cables would feed all the way back to where your interface is. That way it's nice and clean. And a lot of them can run 2 ways, so you can also run a headphone feed from your interface through that same snake to the other end, and the drummer for instance can just plug his headphones right into that box on the other end, and you don't have to run like a 20 or 30 foot headphone extension cable. So again, depending on your studio needs, a good cable snake might be a good investment for you to make. And with that said, let's move on to our last section for today. Alright, so recording books. Definitely something you're going to want to have kicking around. Now you have to remember, when I started getting into this stuff, I was 14, which would have been in 1994. And at that time, the internet was barely even getting started. I mean, it was nothing like it is today. There was no YouTube, there was none of that. So we had to rely on books. Now there's far too many books out there to recommend, but you can find them covering all sorts of subjects. You can find books dedicated to, the studio as a whole, on specific subjects like recording a guitar. There's books specifically about MIDI, all sorts. So don't get me wrong, obviously I love YouTube. All sorts of blogs and forums nowadays you can find fantastic information on. But sometimes it's just nice to sit down and actually flip through a physical book. So that's why I'd recommend hopping onto Amazon or heading down to your local bookstore and seeing if there's any recording books that might pique your interest. And now the last item for today, which thinking back I probably should have tied into the first section, would be lighting. Specifically mood lighting. Now that could be anything from, like the lava lamp behind me or the salt lamp on my desk, to smart lights where you can dim the light, change the color of the light to any color that you want. Could be strip lights or accent lights behind or underneath pieces of furniture. Either way, your studio is supposed to be a creative space, so you can use this lighting to help enhance the mood. Let's say you're working on a really sad song. Do you want to be in lighting, like fluorescent tube lights like you're in an office? No, you probably want to be able to dim the lights and set the lighting accordingly. That way you can help yourself or the artist you're trying to record kind of get into the mood and get a better performance out of them. So lighting, if used creatively, can be a great asset to help either you or others in your studio potentially get better performances. So I hope you guys found this video informative. If you're new here, don't forget to like and subscribe, all that stuff. You guys know how to YouTube. Why am I telling you this? Anywho, that's it for me this week. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys next week.